Hey guys, welcome to the Lunge and Lift podcast. Today we've got a great episode in store for you. We're going to be going through 5 steps to get back from an injury into your full training. We're going to give you some guiding principles on how to break up the process and stay positive, as it's a common thing that happens to most people who train hard. That at some point there's a bump in the road, and it's just important to have some guidance to know where you are in the process and also know what you're working towards. So we're excited to run through that. But before we get into it, as always, a big thank you to our show sponsor, Wit Fitness. Check them out at One New Change in St. Paul's, or the website wit-fitness.com, and use discount code LL15 to get 15% off your purchase. Last week, there was an exciting fashion show launching the new Sarah Sigmundsdottir range. So if you're interested in that, please take a look. And yeah, there's some bargains to be had. We also want to let you know that we are updating our website. There's plenty of new exciting content coming out now on the regular. So please check it out at lungeandlift.com and you won't be disappointed.
Nicely done.
Thank you.
Right, I think a little bit of a legal disclaimer, right?
Yes.
I'm definitely not a doctor.
I'm definitely not a doctor. And before we get into the nitty-gritty of this episode, we do need to make it very clear that this is not medical advice. Everyone's different, and we're going to give you some guiding principles from our experience, but every situation can be very, very different. So it's important that if you've got a current injury, make sure you check with your doctor or healthcare professional or coach as to what the best thing for you to do is in your personal situation. However, hopefully some of the information we'll go through today will be helpful as a point of reference, especially for the coaches who might have clients or athletes that are currently going through an injury, and can help you help them as effectively as possible through what can be a challenging time in your training career.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've both had our fair amount of injuries. And I was actually talking to a client about this, I think it was a week or two ago. And they were a bit down. And it was just, they were like, I can't imagine when I'm going to get back to normal. Back to where I was, back to my fighting weight, my fighting strength, back to feeling good. And we were talking about it, and it's just like, but that's part of the fun is the rebuild. And the thing is, it just meant that, okay, you probably push yourself maybe a little bit too far on something, but it just means you were overreaching. And it means that you was, trying to take the next step. And it does sometimes take a little bit of, knock here, knock there to, strengthen the ship and get you to the next level. So
definitely, it's like a Goldilocks phenomenon where you've got to do a little bit too much sometimes to know what the right amount is, and getting that feedback from your body that, yeah, you've done a bit too much and that's more than you can handle right now. It's just a little bit of feedback and a totally normal part of the process, which we're going to get into.
Yeah, I think as well, it's really all the injuries that I've had over the time is I've always then tried to understand how that they've happened. So that it's either have I lifted with my ego and just gone too heavy for what I was ready for? Have I, just gone out of position? Thankfully, I do record a lot of my lifts and stuff like that, just out of habit now. And sometimes you just see, you're like, oh yeah. And then you watch the one before you, it's like, yeah, I probably shouldn't have gone up that one. And it's just, it is so important to check back, understand where you've just been, to then understand kind of like where you are today. And I think that leads nicely into point number 1.
Sure thing. So step number 1 is to establish your starting point, and that's where you are today. It's not what you were doing a few months ago and the 1RM that you used to have 3 years ago when conditions were perfect. Understanding what you're capable of today, considering your injury. And I think the first thing to get really clear on is what sort of injury is it? Because depending on what's actually happened will massively impact how you should work around it or work with it. For like collisions or impact injuries where there might have been an accident, usually there'll be some sort of tissue damage, and that will require time to heal. So obviously obvious ones are sort of bone breaks or tears where there is real structural damage which the body just needs time to heal and repair. And sometimes this means taking some time off certain movements or deloading certain structures. Like the classic one here is bone bruising. If you've bruised a bone, continuing to load that bone and put impact through it is just going to slow down the healing process. I think the easiest way to think about that one is if you've got a bruise on your body and you kept pressing it or aggravating it, it would just take a lot longer to heal. There's certain physiological processes that need some some time and space to just actually knit back together. And if that's the case, then having patience and doing whatever you can around that. I think it's important to move as much as possible without aggravating the injury faster. If, however, it's not a huge amount of tissue damage, so quite often somebody will have pain or discomfort, they'll go and get scans, and actually the scans will come back showing no structural damage. So if you've got a shoulder injury, you go, all your ligaments and tendons are in good nick, there's no bone damage, then actually that suggests the injury is neuromuscular. So it's actually more about just conditioning the nervous system to use its muscles more appropriately, maybe easing off some tension, redistributing some workload to other areas. And those are the cases where actually it's important to keep training, but probably just revisit the way that you're training so that the workload is distributed more evenly to other areas of the body, and potentially the overused areas are not getting so overused.
That's right. Yeah, and I think this is a really good opportunity for maybe to work on other parts of the body. So, say for instance, if you've got a shoulder injury, it's an opportunity to maybe build up some leg strength and stuff where you don't have to hold anything. So, with the shoulder, that cause you any discomfort. Also, say vice versa, you've got a knee injury or anything like that, maybe your upper body can now get a little bit more time. And not only is that going to be nice to maybe put a little bit of extra work in the other area of the body, say that isn't injured, it also is then going to help still promote a good set of like growth hormone release and stuff like that, which is then going to help with recovery. And like last week when we touched on it in the blood flow restriction episode, in that one Warren mentioned about how you do blood flow restriction and then those hormones are going to circulate around the body and stuff. Now it's an interesting time, because I think when we get injured, it's very easy to just kind of like give up. And I think just to sit back and just say, do you know what, I just need complete time off. And I think, as you kind of alluded to there, sometimes you do need that time off. Sometimes you do need to just take a step back for a moment and actually have some complete rest. But then it's not being too worried about coming back into the gym, and then also taking your time, I guess. And as you mentioned at the end there, it might just be about just scaling back on certain movements and stuff, and then taking your time, easing your way back in and getting the blood flowing around the areas that are injured.
Exactly. Like what we don't want is you to just lie in bed and sit on the couch, getting like less and less able to move, and the body is always adapting. So whatever you're asking your body to do, it's always adapting to it. So if you're telling it that its new function is just to sit on the sofa and do nothing, then it will start to shut down. Muscles will start to atrophy. You'll start to lose the appropriate strength tension relationships in your muscles. So we want to be telling the body that no, it still needs to be active, and we still want it to do work. We still want the muscles to be functioning in certain ways as far as we can without obviously making things worse. And in most situations, this is a massive generalization, but people can do more than they think than when they're injured. If you've got a little niggle in the knee, it doesn't mean you have to stay off your feet for weeks, so you can't do any sort of exercise. I think the more active you are and the more you can maintain a training mindset, the faster you'll heal. For those sort of secondary benefits of being active and getting your hormones stimulated, I think it's not to be underestimated how that feeds into the healing and recovery process. So we should make that a priority. The other thing I wanted to say on the establishing your starting point is doubling down to say that don't obsess about where you used to be. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people, when they're injured, spend a lot of time living in the past, thinking, "Oh, I used to be able to do this. I used to be able to do that." It's not a very productive use of time or energy to be comparing yourself to a former version where, yeah, things were different, times have changed, and accepting the current state of affairs will actually be the most productive way to get you back to whatever that state was in the long term. So focusing on the here and now, like a meditation coach, just always the way.
Yeah, and no, you're right as well, because in our episode with John Houghton, I think it was about 58, and he mentioned, I really liked the analogy. He was like, if you've got a knee problem, then and you lie in bed, your knee will feel better because you're not using it. So, but then as soon as you get back up, it's going to start hurting again, and it's just like you're avoiding, like you mentioned there, you still need to be on your feet, you still need to be moving as much as you can, because you do want to promote the body to start repair and utilize it, so it can get better. And I think that where you said there about not obsessing about where you used to be, I think was one of the hardest things for me whenever I've had, like, say, back injuries and so forth. It's like, when I think back to, say, one of my biggest deadlifts, and then not long after, say a couple months later, I then done my back in, I have never thought I'd be able to get anywhere close to that again. And I was just like, but I can do that. But then also I then reframed it as, I know what my body is capable of. So I know I can get back to that just in time. So rather than rushing to get back to that, I'm going to try and get back to it and then go beyond, because I know my body can do that. So I guess that leads into our step number 2.
Yeah. So we've got where we are currently, and step 2 is to establish where you want to get to. So what's the destination? What's the North Star that we're navigating towards? A message that we bang on and on about, but being clear on the goal and the outcome that you're working towards makes so many decisions for you. And the clearer we are about this, the clearer we can be with our training approach and our training plan. And notice I'm saying training and not rehab. That's another really important mindset to have, is that we're always in training, like whether you're like 1 hour post-op and post-surgery, shall I say, and still in hospital, there's still things you can do to be conditioning your body to be fitter, stronger, even if it's just going to the toilet X times per day to just get a little bit of movement in. Consider that training, not rehab. And on the other end of the spectrum, if we know that we are getting over this injury or recovering from surgery, and we want to go to the Olympics and win a gold medal in weightlifting, we will be going about our training in a slightly different way to running a marathon, for example. And I think for me, one of the biggest missed opportunities in any injury recovery journey is staying as specific as possible to the desired outcome. Like, even the most basic of, I'm going to use the dirty word now, of rehab exercises can be tweaked to be more relevant to your training outcome. So 2 people could have the same knee injury, let's say, but if one of them's a weightlifter and one of them's a marathon runner, the rehab journey should look different. The demands on the body are distinct, so we should be bearing that in mind with the exercises that we plot along the way.
It's nice. Would you be able to maybe dive into a little bit more, give us some examples of how different would it be for weightlifter and runner? So obviously they're very clear differences in general. I think we'd all easily agree on that. But if, say, someone's got a knee injury, say it's the exact same knee injury, what would be maybe your difference in diagnosis between the weightlifter and the runner?
Sure. So the weightlifter is obviously going to have to deal with greater loads, like they're going to be lifting huge weights overhead, whereas a marathon runner is going to be running. So the force demands on that knee are going to be distinct. The range of motion demands are going to be distinct. Weightlifter is probably going to be squatting arse to grass in most scenarios here, with a near maximal degree of knee flexion, whereas a marathon runner is only ever going to be jogging. So they're never going to reach that depth of knee flexion. So there's actually not the same requirement to have maximal, range of motion in that knee. Other demands that would be distinct would be the duration. So you think about the number of reps going through a knee in a marathon compared to the number of reps. There's 6 reps in a weightlifting comp.
Yeah.
9 if you count clean and jerk as distinct. Whereas a marathon runner, depending on their stride length, they're putting a huge number of repetitions through that knee, and every one of them is accompanied with a ground impact. Whereas obviously in weightlifting, it's just one each for each of the movements. So immediately we've got quite distinct requirements from that knee and where we want to get it to. So the rehab journey should reflect that. Like, at its very simplest, we're going to need more range of motion for the weightlifter, and we're going to need more reps and more tissue tolerance, endurance for a marathon runner. And bearing that in mind is really important, because the point at which they get discharged from their physio will be X or Y, and we need to go from there to the end of the spectrum of specificity to get them back to their sport.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess as well, even if you are, say, the runner, you'd still want to be trying to increase a range of motion, say, from a knee injury. So not as a necessity for running per se, but to not expose yourself to, say, a squat as an example. Obviously, they don't need the Astergrass squat, but they will want to at least have a good amount of flexion in their knee for just knee health and day-to-day activity. So I guess, as what you said there, that it is that specificity.
Yeah.
So it's that specificity of the weightlifter does need more of that as a direct path to get back to where they need to be, but the runner doesn't, but they still are going to need a full amount of knee flexion just to get back to day-to-day life and things. So it does determine between what's normal and what's necessary. And I wanted to kind of maybe dive into this bit a little bit here about what's normal and what's necessary, because you touched on about where the physio would discharge them. So obviously this is very dependent on the physio and depends how progressive they are, also the type of style, and I guess like NHS ones are going to be different to maybe sports physios. And like Franco, who's been on a previous episode, where he trains and he trains hard, he understands the need for people to be able to, people that train, to get back to that. So what would be, what is normal?
It's just a matter of opinion, isn't it?
Really is.
So I think it's a good point on NHS versus private versus sports physios. The NHS obviously have a different method of funding, and their mandate is to just get people able to live as fuller lives as they can from I'm trying to define this in a way without using the word normal, but it's very difficult. Just day-to-day functions. I remember when I had my shoulder injury back in the day and saw an NHS physio, and the test was basically, can you button up your shirt yourself, and can you get ingredients out of the kitchen cupboard so you can feed yourself? Right, you're good to go. And then I was out, but my shoulder still hurt, and there's still loads of gym training I couldn't do or sports I couldn't play. Whereas when you've got private health insurance, the payment and incentive structure for the physios is slightly different. So they'll probably spend a little bit more time with you, and you can have treatment a little bit further along the process back towards fuller training. And if you're lucky enough to have access to a sports physio, then it's basically however much time and money you're willing to send their way as to how far they'll work with you. And obviously they work with athletes during season, even when there's nothing wrong with them. So normal is very much in the eye of the beholder, if I can use that. And I think most of our listeners will probably have a very high functioning normal for what they want their body to be able to do. And I think that's one of the reasons we get on, is that we want to see what our bodies are capable of. We want to push the threshold and be much fitter and more active than the traditional definition of normal. So keeping that in mind when you're dealing with healthcare professionals and finding ones that understand where you're coming from can make a huge difference in as to how effectively you can recover from your injury. Because, like you say, if they get where you're coming from and where you want to get to, they can tailor their advice accordingly. Because if we come back to that knee injury, it's again a different use case for a knee to want to just walk up and down the stairs 5 times a day when you're just living at home and not going out, compared to winning a gold medal in weightlifting at the Olympics or running a marathon. So having that end goal in mind for what that knee needs to be able to do will make a lot of decisions for us.
Yeah, it's nicely put. And I think from all previous injuries that I've had, and I've been to NHS physios, I've been to like sports physios, I've seen different types, and it's been really interesting because it wasn't until I met Franco really did I ever see a physio that kind of actually took that different approach into bringing back to normal, what we're saying about normal. And I think we're going to that state of normal, as we said, it is, as you said, the eye of the beholder. So that's the individual where you see as normal. And I think as a nation, we do need to up our sense of normal. We do need to aim higher compared to, we don't want to be just being able to just get by in your day to day. And yeah, it's so important. And I think understanding, as you mentioned there, about like what the goal is at the end and where you're kind of working towards. And I guess investing, if you've got an injury, investing in a physio, if you've got the funds to do it, investing in like a well-known, like a recommended one is so worth the money. Because I've spent, I think it was like 8 to 10 weeks with an NHS physio. Nothing against NHS physios, but again, it was back pain after my motorcycle accident, and I didn't feel any different at the end of it. And so I could have spent those 10 weeks potentially working so directly with someone that might have been able to maybe guide me back to training, because I understand I wanted to get back to lifting, not just to have, say, less back pain. So it's definitely worth that investment, I felt. So I guess moving on to step 3.
Step 3. So once you know where you want to get back to, or just to, chunk up that journey into mini steps. Like any big goal that you're working towards, any training journey, it's about how can you, rather than focusing on like a huge amount of progress that you need to make, having small mini wins along the way and identifying what the gaps are between where you are now and where you want to go. So let's stick with that knee example. It's quite a nice one. If we're lacking range of motion, then that's one of the areas of knee function that we need to restore. If we're lacking the ability to tolerate large numbers of ground impacts when we're running, like what's the volume that we can currently tolerate and how far short of a marathon is that? So we've now got a current state and a 2B state that we want to bridge the gap between. So other things that you might want to consider here are which muscles are doing the majority of the work. So it's basically your motor patterns. So if you've got back pain deadlifting and it's like you're getting a massive lower back pump and you never feel other muscles work, and somebody's watched your form and you can see that they're not contributing very much, then having a part of your journey and a mini win to be feeling your other muscles contribute more during a hinge pattern could be a mini win along the way. And having that at lighter weights and having that at heavier weights until eventually you get towards the level of strength that you desire. And it could be as simple as just raw strength. So once you've spent some time in a cast or in a wheelchair, potentially you'll have lost strength compared to where you used to be. So just pure strength through that limb that hasn't been loaded, having little goals for let's say step ups or lunges or split squats, working that weak leg and just continuing to bring it back up to where you want it to be. I think the smaller these chunks can be, the more you keep your mindset in success, that you are making steps forwards. Whereas if you're just focused on, I want to 1 rep max my snatch and today I can't even bend my knee, you're constantly thinking you're in failure because you're so far away and unable to do the thing that you want. But if you're framing it as, I've taken a step forwards today towards that overall goal because my knee range of motion is better, the positivity becomes a it's like a positive flywheel. The more success you have, the more positive you feel about it, the more success you want to achieve. Whereas if you're constantly reminding yourself that, oh, I used to be able to run a 10, 500 meters and today I can't even run a kilometer, like slowly, you feel like things are going badly. And that just has a cascade of negativity, which makes it feel worse than the reality of the situation actually is.
Yeah, that hits home for me right now because where I had COVID a little while back, and so I went for my first. So I've already done one run, which I nearly died doing, but I went for another run yesterday with Hannah, and we did 5k, first 4k steady, and then the last one was up a hill at a slow pace, but just kept moving. And it's the furthest I've run post COVID, and if I looked back, I'd be like, oh, I was running all this thing, and it's quite depressing when you look at it like that. But I didn't look at that. I was like, oh, cool, this is the furthest I've run post there, and it's now the next step. And it's funny. I really want to get back to some aerobic work, but I've just gone the complete other side of the spectrum, back to strength training, and just I want to do aerobic work, but I'm just like, because I know I'm going to be worse at it. So this is exactly this. I'm taking my time and understanding it's a journey back, and that's the fun part. And same as my strength training, that's a journey back now from where I was to wherever I want to go to. So I just need to get back on the bike as well, in both terms.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a great illustration because you have been so strong and have been so fit, but you've just...
I'm neither now. I'm just a mess.
yeah. But you're hopefully a little bit fitter and a little bit stronger than you were last week, right?
Yeah.
So
well, that's been really nice to watch. Yeah, it is, and it's hard, and we've spoken about it pretty much in these 3 points as well. It's so hard to not think back, because that is your anchor point. That's where you think, cool, that's what I was doing, that's where I was doing, and that's where I want to get to and stuff. And that is a positive thing, as I mentioned at the start. Understanding that what your body is capable of, and then saying, cool, okay, then breaking these, as you said, chunk it up into, right, I want to be able to build up back on my injured leg to build that strong again, and then I cannot wait to maybe power snatch. And then it'll be cool. I can't wait to maybe, is it a power or is it a squat snatch? And then it'll be then cool down into your, say, squat snatches. And you're like, but the thing is, you won't realize it. And then suddenly you'll be squat and you'll forget about your injury. It's the same as like with my daughter, Chloe. It's like these times that get quite hard and stuff like that. And you're just like, oh God, when are these going to end? And then suddenly it stops. And you're like, actually, I kind of missed that. Because it's just, you're so involved in the moment, whether it's injury or whatever in life. It's really hard to sometimes realize that it will pass most of the time. So I guess once you have chunked up these end towards where you want to go to, it's going to be now getting stuck in, right?
Yeah, that's it. So you've done your little gap analysis. You've identified the areas that you need to improve or work on to get where you want to go. So then you've just got to design your training plan to target those gaps. So it's about creating the right stimulus, and the key point here is that it's at an appropriate intensity. So we want to be stimulating the adaptation that we want to create without overdoing it. And it's the most obvious part of this, but it's probably the most butchered part of this in execution, in that people are always trying to do too much too soon, because that's just the nature of improvement. Once you see things going well, you're tempted to just push your luck and see what you can get away with. And it's human nature to do that. But as a coach, especially, it's our jobs to rein people in, to get them to look after, like to prioritize their long term over their short term, which is essentially what this boils down to. Is going slower today will actually mean going faster this month or this quarter or this year. And having the short term patience to dial it in will usually result in more favorable outcomes. If you're right on the edge of what you can actually recover from, you're much more likely to overdo it. So if you're getting the stimulus and then you get out of the gym and you get on with recovering, you're much more likely to just stay in the improvement zone rather than the overreaching zone. So yeah, sort of depending on what your condition is, if you're missing range of motion, doing stretches to improve that range of motion. If you're lacking,
Ash recommended stretches.
yeah, I always recommend stretches. Just
Make
always
sure they're
pulse,
pulsing, right? Yeah.
always pulse, never static. And if you're lacking recruitment of a certain muscle, finding ways to get it to contribute more in the given movement pattern, and always be checking your inputs versus your outputs. So moderating your approach based off of results. So that can mean scaling up or down. If you are nailing your training and everything's going well, then having some sensible progressive overload to continue moving you forwards when you're ready, but also listening to your body if you're getting some feedback to say this is too much right now and actually symptoms are slightly getting worse, then having a look as to why that's happening. Is your technique off in a certain movement, or is it literally just too much? Have you had a big jump in your volume or intensity recently? And that might be what it is. But if you're comparing your inputs and your outputs, you'll have a good idea of what the change has been that's brought about that result. One thing I wanted to say on this one is about pain. So pain is feedback, but it's not the absolute truth. And we do a deep dive on this with Franco in one of our earlier episodes. I'm not sure the numbers, but scroll back for episodes with Franco, because pain science is fascinating and it's something we want to bear in mind. But sometimes there is a case for working through an appropriate amount of pain. Let's put it that way. I'm not saying by any stretch to just ham your body and ignore the signals it's sending you, but listen to those 2 episodes and get a good understanding of why that might be the case.
They were season 1, episode 11 and 14. So there's part 1 and part 2. Great episodes, real good deep dives. Early days as well in our podcast. So if you pop over to YouTube, you can see some. Well, you head over to YouTube and have a little look. Really interesting here. So the design in the training to create the right stimulus. So I'm going to use myself as an example, because I think as I'm going through these things, it's been really nice to actually think, actually, that's why I've been kind of doing these things without overthinking it. And an example is, so I follow my strength method thing, which over a 3-week cycle is build to a heavy 5, build to a heavy 3, and then build to a heavy 1. Now for the past 3 or 4 weeks, basically I've just built to a heavy 5, built to a heavy 3. Then I went back to build to a heavy 5, and then I'm going back to build to a heavy 3. So I'm not actually going anywhere near a heavy 1 for a while. So I'm just cycling between the first 2 weeks to give myself, because I don't want to push myself too far. So because I know that's when my ego is going to come in, and I'll probably reach a little bit too far and potentially say do more damage. And it's like, building strength isn't testing strength. And I think going back to one of our old episodes about testing, competing and training, like one of those things, I'm really trying to train at the moment and build my strength back, and understand it's going to take time. So testing it isn't going to tell me anything really at the moment. Now that might not be injury based. That's just kind of easing myself back into training. But it's this exact same principle. It's in understanding when you're going through anything, whether it's recovery from an injury or a time out of training, you can scale up and you can do nice big jumps if it feels good, and don't be afraid to. But I think it is a thing of just checking the ego is the biggest thing. And for me, that's been a hard thing, but it's been nice because I've been able to. Last week, I think it was, I was deadlifting and I stopped at a certain weight and I was like, I could go heavier, but I know that is just pure ego. And I was like, cool, I'll step back, and I was happy with that. But it does take an extra moment. So if you think I'm going to put more weight on, just say, do I need to put more weight on? And if you're going to put 1 kilo on or something like that, don't do that. It is an absolute waste of time. Especially if you're not competing, just don't get me wrong, I've done it. I'm saying from experience, don't do it.
There's a couple of things I really like about that. Is that, one, you've said again, the process is the same, whether you're training or you're recovering. You're just trying to improve your body in some way, shape, or form. And the second thing was you got your stimulus, so you knew what your outcome is. You're trying to get stronger in the deadlift, and you had achieved that. You'd created a stimulus, so your body would come back stronger next time you deadlift. So you didn't need to do any more because that box has been ticked, and anything beyond that is just the risk reward becomes a lot less favorable because you've already got the stimulus, so your body is going to adapt to be stronger next week. So what do you stand to gain? You stand to gain a bit of ego and a better number to feel good about. Whereas actually the long-term goal of getting stronger is already underway. And so there's no need to add that extra risk without much more reward. It's not as if you get a huge amount more stronger because you've done one heavier set. And don't get me wrong, like in certain situations, like if you're peaking for a competition, things like that, then things can be different. But especially in this context of injury recovery, we'll always err on the side of caution because, we want to get back to 100% as soon as possible. Like we said, going slower means going faster later.
It's better to get one step forward than trying to take two steps and then actually having to take some back, right? So it's just moderating, and it is hard to do, but it is so important. And I think that leads us on to step 5.
Yes, step 5 can be basically summarized as don't push your luck. So it's very related to the appropriate intensity. But I think the key points I wanted to illustrate here are that tissue tolerance takes time, especially for your passive structures. So what I mean by this is things like bones, ligaments, and tendons don't adapt as fast as muscles. So muscles can, because they've got a very good blood supply compared to the passive structures, they can actually heal, recover, and adapt at a faster rate than these passive structures. And your body will be able to do more sooner, sort of muscularly, than it will do with those passive structures. And good examples of this are a lot of rock climbers. They rely on those passive structures a lot more than their muscular structures compared to other athletes. So they'll peak in their athletic careers later in life, so that because it just takes that extra time for the finger tendons and ligaments to build up in thickness compared to a younger athlete who just hasn't had the time to condition those tissues to be as resilient. So if your injury has been on one of those passive structures, you're going to feel good and feel strong and able to do more than your passive structures are actually ready for. So having patience here is always going to be a better idea if you have time. Obviously, you're for a professional athlete and you've got to get match fit as soon as possible. You're probably going to be willing to take on a little bit more risk than the average Joe. But tissue tolerance is a key part of injury resilience. Like something I often say is that you can adapt to almost anything if you go slow enough, as long as you're getting the stimulus for those, say your tendons to thicken up, which is protective. You're essentially putting a small amount of damage through that tendon so that it grows, recovers, and repairs to be thicker and stronger. If you go slow enough and maintain that stimulus over the long term, your tendons can withstand unbelievable amounts of force and stress. But as soon as you go faster or too fast, where that rate of damage exceeds the rate of repair, then you're now degrading that tendon and things are eventually going to catch up with you. So as long as you are stimulating and getting the improvement benefits, and Dr. John Houghton talks about this really nicely in our podcast as well, that tendons do need stimulation even to recover because of these some of these factors like less blood flow compared to muscles. If you are doing that, you're going to be looking after yourself for the long term rather than just getting some short-term quick gains, which eventually will come to a stop.
Yeah, I think that's the don't push your luck one. I think is a really nice way to finish because it really means you need to have identified your journey to understand where you're trying to get to, and to not try and jump ahead too many steps, because I think that's where we slip up, because we know, and especially when we say when we have an idea of what it's felt like before, as you kind of mentioned a couple of points back, is in like, it's that risk reward, and that thing of, I know I can do more, I know I can do this because I've done that before, but then you have to remember, cool, okay, that's not plan safe potentially for another 2 weeks. So to hold in on where you are, and patience is we're a generation of, like, instant gratification and everything. We need it now, and it's like, it's cool to have that, but at the same time, it's like your body hasn't adapted to that. So, and this is why I think training, like improving your physique and building strength and these sort of things, is you have to do the work. And there are enhancements, but generally it's, you have to do the work. And even if you do anything that might assist you, you still have to put in a lot of work and have the sacrifices along the way to kind of get to your end goal. So it's like one of the things that there is no shortcut. And I think when you have had a period out from recovery, or you are back to full strength and you're now trying to build beyond, it is that thing of always asking yourself, is it worth it if I go that little bit more? And sometimes it is. If you're on the stage, as you mentioned, you're competing, sometimes taking that extra 1 kilo might get you the gold medal compared to, say, silver, and you're willing to take that risk, then cool, that do you. But most of the time when you're training, it's just not worth it. And I've, from previous experience, from coaching in classes, and someone just about gets a 1 rep max and they go, I've got one more kilo. It's like, really? Like, okay, yes, cool. Okay, if that's what you want to do, and I'm not talking down to that, because I have been there, but it's now talking from experiences in saying it's probably not worth it, especially if you've grinded out a 1 rep max. You've not got 1 more kilo, because you've put everything into that rep where your nervous system is fried. Everything is done. If you get another one, you're fluking it. But
I was just going to say, it's almost like a really shit game of the weakest link, where the money's rising and you can bank it, but you can continue to take more risk. But the difference between this and the weakest link is that the prize doesn't get much greater. Like, you've made progress in that you've got a stimulus. Your body is now going to come back better next time round. But because you're greedy, you want to take on extra risk without much extra reward. And the classic case of this is, somebody just gets pain-free and they think that's the day to push the limit and find out what their max is on the given movement. And it's just that you've just got yourself pain-free. You haven't got the right to go to absolute failure in this movement, because your tissues have literally just got to pain-free. Doesn't mean out of the woods, and doesn't mean you've got no improvement left before you're 100% able to do whatever you want. And it's the sort of boring parent type advice, but being sensible and just taking some progress, taking those wins to the bank, and living to fight another day is the sensible route. And doing that as much as you can will long-term work out for you.
Beautiful. So just to recap, step 1, establish your starting point. Where are you today? Number 1. Number 2, you want to establish where you want to get back to. So what is it you want to try and, what's your North Star? What are you trying to get towards? What is your end point? Then you're going to chunk up that journey towards the end goal. So you're going to break it down and then create a plan that's going to help you get to where you want to go. Then step 4 is design the training to create the stimulus that at the appropriate intensity for you to get back. And then lastly is don't push your luck. So a couple of key points to take away, Ash. What would you want the listeners to really make sure they're fully understood and taken away?
I think the first one is get clear on whether you actually need time to heal. Like, what sort of injury do you have? Seek some professional advice. If you do need time to heal, what's the most active you can be while still giving your tissues that time and rest so that you don't make things worse. But as we said earlier, there's probably more that you can do than you think. So just, work with your professionals there to figure out what the best thing to do is in the short term. I think another key point would be that if it's a overuse related injury, getting to the root of why that overuse is happening. You might not need to stop training at all, just modify the way you do things. Stuff like tightness, if you get chronic tightness in a certain area, then you might be able to adjust the way you do things or get your movement mechanics sorted out. And this is especially the case that if you've had a scan and everything looks good. And it's probably something neuromuscular, so working on your motor patterns and technique. And the third one I'd say is bridging the gap between where you currently are and where you want to be gradually, not trying to take huge chunks off that journey in one go and rushing the process. As long as you're taking steps forwards, you're taking steps forwards. So everyone always wants to go faster, but the slower you go, the less likely you are to have a backward step, and you're still moving forwards. And like we say all the time, that compound interest phenomenon, by consistently moving forwards day after day, that's where the magic happens. That's where the huge, and no one got super strong in a short period of time. Like, it always is a gradual process, and the people that go too fast are the ones that have the biggest setbacks. So having patience and just being grateful that you're making progress is a good frame of mind to stay in.
Yeah, I think that thing of, the best athletes are the non-injured athletes, right? The ones that can make the best progress. As you said, that compound interest really makes a huge benefit. So really hope you got a lot to take away from, guys, today. It's probably one you might have to listen back to, get those points out. I'll write those points down in the comment box down below, the description box, just so you can really take them in and absorb them. And hopefully, if you are injured, that this has given you some light and given you an understanding that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Don't worry about it. We've all been there. Crack on and don't push your luck. So as always, guys, thank you very much for giving us your time. We really appreciate it. We checked out iTunes, the Apple Podcast. We've got 25, I think, 5-star reviews. So really appreciate those 25. Anyone else? We really love those. They're definitely going to help us grow. And if you did enjoy this episode, or anyone that's injured and is in a bit of a dark place, please share this with someone. And if they're not in a dark place, share it with them anyway and say, look, have a listen to these guys. They kind of know what they're talking about, and it will hopefully help you get out the other side. So thank you very much for your time. As always, you can find us on all the usual social platforms at lunge.lift. Check out our website, lungeandlift.com. And as always, thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers, guys.